And now we welcome the second speaker for the proposition, Rupert Sneath, a second-year PPE student at the University of Edinburgh. Rupert, the floor is yours. Yeah, feel free to pick it up as well.
Oh, great. Actually, okay. I cannot stress how important this debate is in our current political climate. And I thank the President for bringing it to the Edinburgh Union. I also thank Anna for her very eloquent speech, but I'm worried about the issue of definition here. She talks about that we're mentioning the toxic masculinity, the sexic masculinity, a post-war American masculinity, although not everything is about the US. We're talking about versions of masculinity, but as Casper warned, this is dodging. This is the no true Scotsman's fallacy. But I will accept the challenge. We can reject all the cons of toxic masculinity because the cons are obvious. But let's just focus on the pros that they've just mentioned. And I've quoted them. To be the bigger person, suffer for others, and mentioning things like stoicism as positive things. As Casper brilliantly put, masculinity is hard to pinpoint, especially from my position against traditional masculinity and gender as an entire structure that we live by. It is often ridiculed, as often studies of gender are. But this is because we lack the language and general impetus to make this easy to understand. Gender is so ingrained into the English language and our upbringings that we cannot imagine a society without it. A recent interview between Piers Morgan and Zach Polanski is a brilliant example of this. Morgan asks, "Do you think a woman can have a penis?" And Polanski says yes. Morgan ridicules him, saying that woman is a biological term. Morgan is wrong, as any argument that artificially simplifies science inevitably will be. But yet, in our head, he sounds right. We find this contradiction between the word woman and the word penis because of our language binary. But penis is a biological term and woman is a societal term. Thus, any meaningful stance on gender can be torn apart by fallacies like Morgan's, which turns debates like this into a cesspit. Tonight, I'm going to avoid that cesspit. I like being a man. I believe it's given me great privilege, and I know it's not just about phalli and testosterone. As I said, there's no point pulling down masculinity for its toxicity or entering the sensational trans debate, because the opposition will just dodge away from it. I will instead turn to what the opposition has called the good of masculinity. This is because the norms of sexuality and gender serve power, not people. Traditional masculinity is not an eternal biological truth. Qualities that we associate with it, such as emotional suppression, dominance, strength, are produced through historical processes, even the positive ones. And what it means to be a man today has been shaped by medical discourse, military discipline, labour needs, state governance, and religious morality, to name a few. At no point in history has it been constant or globally ubiquitous. European traditional masculinity has been a tool for control, no matter how good we believe its qualities are. And I'm going to give 3 points to illustrate my case here. And that case is that the sources and reasons for traditional masculinity cause a social hierarchy that keeps men subservient and useful while simultaneously making men feel powerful. The first is masculinity's role in state governance as a form of discipline, to pacify both men and women and limit social change. I mention women here because you cannot talk about masculinity without mentioning femininity. It's a dialogical binary system. If men are strong, women must logically be weaker than them. And ancient Greek culture is a good beginning point for this Western masculinity. Anna spoke about America being the start of where we're coming from here, but being a proper man in ancient Greek culture has been morphed from today. So it required rigorous self-control over one's body, desires, and emotions. And it was something that was performed through discipline, not something you simply were. Stoicism, in particular, was central to this suppression. And men today are still expected to master themselves and deny vulnerability. Again, this is a part of the pros of the qualities that we have. But this demand is not a natural one. Nothing about our physiology as men causes this. Rather, it is a historical moral code that connects manhood to hierarchical superiority and protects power. It benefits the state by creating compliant workers and soldiers, benefits patriarchal institutions like the military by training men for dominance, and contains social change by discouraging men from seeking help or challenging hierarchy. It has persisted because it has always been in the interest of institutions and governments to do so. These qualities, however, do not benefit men, they limit their humanity. I think a simple and visibly excessive example we can use here is Nazi Germany. But all Western states have used and sometimes required these methods in some form to survive. Before Hitler, Germany was an incredibly liberal society under the Weimar Republic. But the Nazi regime reinstated strong traditional gender roles and disseminated them through groups like Hitler Youth. This was not for the benefit of strong, independent men, it was a tool for population control. Hitler Youth entrenched valuable ideals into young boys through militaristic discipline, emphasis on bravery, endurance, and the rejection of weakness. It cultivated this through uniformity, and socialization aimed at preparing boys for national service, fighting and dying for the fatherland. Girls in the League of German Maidens were socialized into domestic roles to maintain the German race and were even given medals for giving birth to more babies. Now, this masculinity, inherited from the ancient Greek and Christian morality, was weaponized to regulate society, was to reinforce domination and perpetuate violence. Hitler needed a population willing to work for his national effort and later fight in the war. And by emphasizing hierarchical labor systems and family organization, the Nazi regime was able to supercharge national identity, whereby men are defenders of the state. The positives we are talking about when we talk about traditional masculinity are then used by state power, by governments, by institutions to weaponize it as a tool for brainwashing, I'd argue. These uses of traditional masculinity appear extreme, but are purposely integrated into all state societies, not just dictatorships, including our own. And Dr. Curry will go on to say why Britain in particular is a very important case for this. My second illustration of the venomous sources of our masculinity will be militarization. War shapes masculinity, and masculinity shapes war, to the point where the military becomes a national end in itself. Being a soldier is an awful reality. You are around what counts as a real man, and shames and marginalizes those men that don't conform. This is drawing on from what Casper mentioned. This produces intense stigma around male nurturing, creativity, or emotional expression, so far as that men end up policing each other as proof of their own masculinity, an internalized system of surveillance that greatly harms the individual and wider society. This is not because effeminate men are any stupider or gay men any weaker than the traditional masculine, but rather because it is not in government and institution interest, and thus is better discarded. Masculinity is tied to political agendas, and no matter how good the qualities themselves are, it is tied to political agendas. When men are trained for dominance and emotional restriction, it breeds resistance to social change, rigid gender hierarchies, homophobia and transphobia, as these non-traditional masculinities threaten the order that the status quo must maintain to stay in power. I must remind us all that masculinity is not a biological truth. Terms like heterosexuality did not exist until the 20th century. Blue was a girlish colour until World War II. I will finish, because I'm running out of time, by saying that I am hopeful for society, but also doubtful. The past couple of decades have seen the absolutism of gender stripped back, and the life of a gay man, for example, is easier than it has ever been before in this country. Feminine qualities in men are slowly, albeit very slowly, becoming more mainstream. However, we have a long way to go. Transphobia is increasingly extreme, with government impetus to exacerbate it, all despite the fact that anti-trans lawmakers and protesters have likely never been well acquainted with a trans person. They still vehemently battle it. But this is entirely down to traditional masculinity. Trans women in particular are in exact opposition to the masculinity that maintains hegemonic order and restricts social change. I think, though, that these arguments are failing, and we are slowly starting to realise, however wrenching it may be from the core of our own identity, that gendered roles are nonsensical. I would prefer a debate without them. I prefer a world without them. Mr. President, I could be more proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Rupert.